Colleagues, welcome to the second round. And this is the round where you can pay back to Lauren. Means in the first round he was the one giving us a lot of message. Now it's your turn to go into action. Before we start the second round, I would love to introduce, actually, I know most of you know Rainer. It's actually not a real need to introduce him, but it is my privilege and pleasure to have him on stage today. And we will be now complete, close to complete, with Pauline joining us. And don't worry when they are so nice to each other. Their nickname is the Gang of the Three from Atlanta. So Pauline has been suffering under Lorenzo as an athlete, so she knows what she's talking about when she puts it into practice. So I'm pleased also to welcome Pauline as not one of our council members, but she's also in our coaches commission. Let me give us 2 seconds about Rainer. I'm really impressed that he take the time to come to see you, to see the coaches, because he has a big group of athletes. For example, tomorrow will not be D-Day, but a busy day for him. We have Daphne, who has the semi-final tomorrow. You all have seen her cruising easily in the heats, and we are looking forward. Tomorrow, I told this. Tomorrow, yes, tomorrow, I'm prepared. So, they start already, the Gang of the Three. So she will have the semi-final tomorrow, and tomorrow is also a final, you correct me, for Christian Taylor. One more day, after tomorrow, for Christian. Daphne is clear. I would like to spend 1 second on Taylor. Taylor got our interest, and therefore also this was my first reason to contact Rainer. You may have noticed, even not coming from triple jump, that this athlete is not only incredibly successful, he won the gold medal in both last Olympics, but when you look at the video, he has changed the technique. So he has completely changed, you correct me, from right, right, left to left, left, right, or opposite? Left, left, right to right, right, left, which is neuronal, an incredible shift. Imagine I ask you from tomorrow on to write with your weak hand. Look in other sports, when I'm always amused about, is it sports? I'm not sure. This game where they make a lot of money, football, and you read, the striker couldn't make the goal because the ball was on the wrong foot. There is no wrong foot. There's only a foot which was not trained by bilateral training. And one of the amazing things I learned looking at Christian Taylor, that there's a coach behind who has the skill to make this happen, to be able to jump right, right, left, or left, left, right. So we have coaches who not only work in different events. Rainer is high-level coach, not only for triple jump and sprints, but also for long jump. This is what we are looking for, getting in dialogue with our top coaches and ask them the question, why? We will start this part with the biomechanics. We will have a quick look through some of the sprint biomechanics which were made during the 100-meter final. And I will invite our 2 presenters and our moderator to take over so they can do the technical part while I relax with you. Thank you.
So we can all see the screen here. So this is the biomechanical analysis that was done by the team of the men's 100 meters, which we just received, by the way. And so typically what we're concerned with in terms of biomechanics of sprinting is how much time was required to put the force into the ground and how much time is required to recover your limb through its optimal range of motion and put your foot back down onto the ground. And so the key thing is that from a coaching standpoint, we want to be able to recognize what is excessive and what is actually too small. And so the goal oftentimes is to reduce the amount of time that it takes to put the force into the ground by just 5 milliseconds, and reduce the amount of time that it takes to recover the leg by another 5 milliseconds. Well, if you can save 5 milliseconds on the ground and 5 milliseconds in the air, you saved 1/100th of a second per step. Now, in this case, these athletes, because of the speed at which they're traveling, are taking somewhere between 41 and 47 steps. Let's say 45. Well, if you can be successful at save a little time on the ground, save a little time in the air, you can see right away that you've just run almost a half a second faster. Now, obviously, these people are optimizing their forces. And let's just look at some of the data that's come out. Again, we've just had a chance to look at it. So they used 18 cameras shooting at 250 frames per second. And they've selected certain variables to portray. And then they've done the traditional 10-meter splits. So we really, in terms of breaking things down, you really have to get micro rather than macro. If you look at 10-meter segments, lots of stuff can happen in 10 meters. That's average velocity. We want to know what instantaneous velocity is. So we're just going to go through, and Raina and I have had quite a bit of exposure looking at some of the biomechanical parameters of especially the U.S. athlete Gatlin, and by virtue of the fact he's one of the best in the world, Usain Bolt. So you want to walk us through?
Not really. So, like, just with our science team that we use on a regular basis, we always look at these segments and try to figure out where we can improve. And when we're looking at ground contact times, you're looking at 0.200, and then as you get up to max velocity, you're looking at something under 0.100. So as you look at the 10-meter segments, you're trying to figure out a correlation between how much horsepower you have to get out of the blocks and get moving, and then how little you can create the ground contact times and how much power with it. So for us, like looking at the times, we have an idea that you're going to need to be in the 3.9 range to 30 meters. That's a given, and then you start breaking it down farther from there. Reaction times you can kind of see, and if you look at throughout the championships, lane 8 has had a really, really slow reaction time through most of the races. So it's interesting to see at the end of the champs why that's happening now, in terms of if it's blocks, if it's in terms of sound, if it's in terms of reaction off the walls behind the lane 8 or not. So,
and just a little bit of extra insight, since I work with Su Bing Tian. He was neurologically fried by the time he got to the final. We didn't use any omega waves or anything like that during the competition, because you don't want to test somebody and tell them, look, you're crap, you're not going to run very well today. But just from his explosiveness and things like that. So in addition to the fact that it's further away from the actual gun, even though they have speakers, he was pretty well cooked by the time he got to the final, even though he ran quite well in the first round in the semifinal. So one of the conclusions is, I think, as I read in the summary, that the reaction time was correlated with the overall time.
Yeah.
And so, based on all of the research that I've read, reaction time doesn't necessarily correlate with the finish time. There's a lot of variables that go into that. One of my hurdlers going into the European Indoor Championships, and for those of you who were in Belgrade, realized that there was maybe a lot of faulty starts. The mechanism was bad. And she has an excellent reaction time. She can consistently go 11/100ths of a second. She was so worried that this system would false start her. Her reaction time was a lot worse than it typically would be if she would have just gone. And so, what we'd also do is we look at the 3-meter time, okay? From the first movement of the athlete to when the head breaks a plane of 3 meters. This is kind of our criteria measurement relative to starting quality. Now, what's typically the first thing that moves on a sprinter? Their head. Normally their head will pop up. How much closer did that get them to the finish line? 0. So, just looking at these simple things that you can do in training in order to make things more productive. And as per Raina, we don't necessarily look at every 10-meter segment, but the 30-meter mark is real important. And then the 60-meter mark is important, and to me the 80-meter mark is important, because this falls in line with the race model that I've used for many years in the 100 meters. Yeah, so any questions after we've just spewed forth there? I mean, we can... Okay, we can just move on. Position in the race, where people were in terms of the gold and the silver and the bronze positions. As you see, that Bolt was very uncharacteristically in 6th place at 30 meters. And so I can't speak to his training and things like that, but I know he hasn't had a lot of competitive stimulus this year. And so in order to be sharp, you've either got to race in practice or you've got to race in training. The fact that Gatlin was able to keep his composure in the last 2 segments of the race, unlike Rio, where he kind of started leaning for the line at about 80 meters. This was the difference between Coleman and Gatlin. And it'll be interesting to see the different segments and how those play out. Any questions on that particular slide?
I have a question, Coach. Is it, well, I remember when you were coaching me, you often told me that I needed to keep my chest up and run straight past the line. Is it, what is the best method? Because I know some coaches tend to teach their athletes to start to lean. And as you know, sometimes, depending on what track you're on, there are several little white lines coming across. And because you're a little delirious, it can confuse the line. Well, I know it cost me to win the Olympic gold medal, but I noticed that a lot of athletes now are really just like diving for the line. Any suggestions on that?
There's kind of, and Raina can speak to this also, there's kind of three different strategies in terms of a finish. In terms of your race model, you have the start, pure acceleration, transition, maximum velocity 1, maximum velocity 2, speed maintenance, and finish. And so the first one is stay tall and run through, okay? Which is what
you taught me.
Taught you, and the reason why we did that is because if you give a sprinter a stopwatch and you have them start it without looking at the stopwatch and then stop it after 1 minute is gone, most of them will stop it at 29 seconds because they're bad judges of time. And the athlete sets things up relative to the amount of time that it takes. It's not a spatial orientation. They're not looking at necessarily lines on the track. That's another interesting point. But they always think they're finished before they're finished. That's why having a strategy with a race model breaks things down into a bite-sized portion so you know exactly when you have to finish. If you can displace your torso further in front of your center of mass at the finish, you have an advantage because your body will cross the finish line early. Two techniques, the trip finish, which basically you throw your palms back facing up and your body down. This drives the upper body down. The second one is the trip finish, or the swim finish, where you throw one arm forward and the other arm back, and you turn your ear toward the ground. That rotates and then gives the breadth of the torso rather than the depth of the torso. So a little bit difference. But when you're measuring to the thousandths of a second, any little bit counts. Here's the caveat. You have to practice this in training. If you don't practice it, don't expect that it's going to be efficient. Now, go back and look at Tori Bowie's finish. She took several small steps prior to the line, smaller than what you would typically do. What this did is it shifted her torso forward. And then she was planning on taking one big step after the line. Only problem is she was too late getting her foot on the ground. And consequently, she bounced across the finish line just about. But it got the gold medal. And Alan Johnson, who is one of the great finishers in the 110 hurdles, really get those steps going and then get the body down. Male hurdlers seem to be the best at finishing, particularly 60 meters indoors because there's not very much. It's 1-2 dive. And so this is kind of the strategy, but you have to practice whatever technique that they're going to use.
Yeah, like I don't really practice the lean. Like if you look at a lot of the sprinters I've coached, we're trying to correct not leaning because they have an ability to block themselves going into the finish line. And if you look at Daphne's finish, she's got a good momentum going through the 100-meter finish, and then 2 steps out, she's blocking, and the only thing that's happened is her chin's going forward. She actually blocked herself the last couple of steps. So we're still trying to work on how to finish just a race without killing your momentum.
So the early phases, it just talks about, again, first step, second step. So what we would want to see is what's the ground time, what's the air time. And so target what's happening with the top, especially male sprinters, but some of the female sprinters are able to do it. They get a good double leg force application against the blocks, and they're clearing the blocks in 0.24, 0.25 seconds males, a little bit less for a little bit greater time for females. But the important thing is, what is the first air time, and what is the first ground time? So if you're 0.05 in the air, and you're 0.15, which is pretty good on the ground, that's 0.2 of a second that covers that first step. 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8 a dollar, 5 steps in 5 steps per second on the first step. Now, we've been told, and again, here's one of the myths, that stride frequency starts out low and then increases. Not at the world-class level anymore. So understanding that there's step times doesn't necessarily give us all the information that we need. We need to look at more ground time, air time. The start is reaction, force application against the blocks in the first 2 steps. First 2 steps are decidedly different than all the other steps. You want to speak to this one? Yeah. So, I mean, the one thing that Raina and I looked at right away is that...
It's a 2 personal question. The gentleman in the white?
I am Anthony Kofi. Je suis l'entraîneur de Talou Marie-José de Côte d'Ivoire.
C'est nécessaire pour le truc ici. C'est vrai que...
Sachant que le sprint est au haut niveau, les sprinters doués et courent par réflexe, je voudrais savoir quels sont les facteurs qui interviennent et qui facilitent le temps de contact au sol. Ça, c'est ma première question. Et la deuxième, je pense qu'il aurait fallu comparer le tableau des hommes et le tableau de la finale des dames, pardon.
So with the biomech studies, like every championships has their own science team, and with this science team, we're trying to decide if they have enough experience, and the numbers that we're getting, it's their first time at a championship. So once we get all the numbers from the championships, we'll be able to kind of correlate to the other championships. But right now, we're going to see what it looks like and make a judgment. Like, this is their first time at a championship, so we're going to try and figure out what this says, because some of the numbers for us are a little bit different than what we see on a regular basis with the people we're testing every day, every week, every month. A lot of the stuff that we have, Ralph Mann, in the UK, and now in the Netherlands we use Dr. Paul Bryce, OptiJump, Lavig, all those different things that we use. So these are high-speed films, and so we have to see more and more studies on what they've done. Okay, it would be nice to be able to see the analysis of the women's compared with the men's, but we don't have it yet. In terms of ground contact times, in terms of block clearance, in terms of all the different segments, everyone's going to create their own power structure. With Daphne, you can see her size and her length. You got Toulouse, who's obviously strength to weight ratio is amazing. So ground contact times, when you look at them, even though the size is different, so the ground contacts are going to correlate very similar to each other. But the amount of horsepower it takes to get from point A to point B is what we have to look at. So
there was another coach over here that had his hand up.
Just to add a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Just to add a little bit. There are a couple key factors relative to ground time. The distance you put your foot in front of your center of mass is inversely correlated. So if I overstride, if I put my foot excessively down, now I have to displace my center of mass over a greater distance. Okay. The corollary to that is there's an optimal angle at the hip joint between the thigh and the body when the leg should strike. If you have a long leg, the foot with that optimal angle, the foot is actually further in front of the body. So if you look at Bolt, whose legs are tremendously long, he has a greater front side contact distance. Consequently, we would expect his time to be a little bit higher than, say, some of the shorter sprinters that we've seen out there. The other thing is joint stability. We talked about pre-innervation. You have to pre-innervate the stabilizers at the knee, and you have to be strong enough through your hip extensors in order to accelerate the body through the ground. If the foot is going forward when you hit the ground, called positive foot speed, this will cause a braking force. You need to be able to pull the foot backwards. And so if you want, for example, if you want to run 10 meters per second and you want to run with high efficiency, you want to pull your foot backwards at about 8 to 8.5 meters per second. And so these are some of the components, some of the major components that contribute to ground time or reduction of ground time. Okay, Raina talked about, we've never seen Gatlin in mid-race with such a long stride. So we just, and such a low frequency. Mid-race characteristics, they're looking at bilateral balance. And so, we do a lot of testing with our athletes on OptiJump and just small tests relative to power and bilateral symmetry in order to be able to identify potential problems. Late phase, the variation in ground time is related to leg length somewhat and power ratios. Air time, however, there is an optimal air. We have found, and our biomechanists have found, there's an optimal air time. And ironically, it's 0.123 seconds. So if you get excessive, so 1.33 seconds, what happens is too much vertical velocity. And so you're probably you're probably braking, losing a lot of horizontal momentum to generate vertical. You're flying further, but it's taking you a longer time. Less than that, you're not displacing your center of mass enough during that stride, and so that you're spinning your wheels more. So that relationship is real important. So I think that we give them the link to go online to the IAAF.org website, and then you can drill down more, but based on our comments.
Now, please open questions to the floor to our two coaches.
And esteemed athlete. I've sworn Pauline to secrecy that she will not tell all the bad stories about me.
How much you paid?
Wait, you're going to pay her more for that, huh?
Yeah.
Question here. Jerome Romain, Dominica. So for you, Lauren, you mentioned that you knew in the finals that your athlete was a little fried. My question to you is, at what point did you recognize that, and what do you think was some of the factors that contributed to that?
It was recognizable in the warm-up was the first place when we looked at his jumping characteristics and that kind of thing. He's, a couple standing long jumps, and you could tell right away that he was, normally 3 meters 10, 3 meters 15. He wasn't 3 meters. So this is one key point that you look at, and this has happened several times with a lot of really high-speed runs. The other thing is he's been away from home for a long time, and so. And just stress of travel and this type of thing. But at this point now, I'm not. I've done a lot of the preparation work with him, but in this last final phase, I wasn't all that involved with him. But to make a world championship final is a tremendous feat.
I have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. All right, so quick question. Just like to know your views. Why did Elaine lose?
Didn't run fast enough. Yeah, I can't. I know I cannot speak to that because I didn't see the race live. I saw it tape delayed and that type of thing. But there's certainly probably a multifactorial preparation. She's been running extremely well all year. You never can tell. Maybe it was something she ate. I don't know what hotel they were staying in, but in our hotel we've got a bit of a norovirus outbreak. Maybe she just hasn't been sleeping well. I mean, it could be so many small things that that maybe there's two small things that make a big thing. But she's a tremendous competitor, and she certainly performed well under pressure before, so there would be no reason to believe that she choked or anything. So, but that would be a question for her and for her coach.
I understand that Elaine was thrown up a lot in the call room, so she must have eaten something that upset her stomach, and that probably took a toll on her body, both mentally as well as physically.
Raina, why do you think Daphne finished third in that race and not win it?
She didn't run fast enough to get first. No, I mean, looking at Daphne's first 10 meters, it was the slowest of the championships, the slowest we've had in a while. Obviously, the start's been a big conversation for the last couple of years. So we've worked on it, and then, it didn't happen in the final. So there's still more work to be done, but I think from 30 meters on, she was good, but we just have some work to do, that first 3-4 steps to get it right.
If you don't mind me saying something, as a former athlete, sometimes it has nothing to do with coaching. It just is a matter of fact of the athlete getting up that particular day, and for one reason or the other, sometimes you go to a spot where everything is blank. You don't really, you're there, but you're not really there, and you tend to make a tremendous amount of mistake. And I know I did through some of my rounds, right, Coach?
No.
Yes, I did. And you were very upset, but we talked about it and we made a correction, of course. I came back in the final and made the adjustment. Sometimes it just has nothing to do with coaching. You just get out there, you just go blank.
Hi, Aaron Gatson from Dominica. I'm a jump coach, but Lauren, you had asked a question, or you had made a point around there's an optimal angle for kind of where your foot would hit, or your hip angle where your foot hits in relation to your center of mass for running. Like as a triple jump coach, I think a lot about that in regards to your foot placement on a contact and how that impacts your vertical and horizontal velocity. And I think it might differ per person. So I was trying to figure out, and I was curious to see where that optimal angle comes from, if that matters. Like if your trochanter length impacts that, if your strength profile impacts that, and if it's consistent across different types of athletes, male and female.
I'm going to defer to Raina, especially since you mentioned triple jump.
In terms of jumpers, like obviously got a guy sitting next to you that jumped a little bit. So the technical aspects of jumping are going to change what your ground contact times are, right? So with Christian, we're trying to get on and off the ground as quick as possible. He didn't grow up bounding. He's not a big bounder. He doesn't squat, does a lot of those things. So we have to use as much speed as possible and kind of skip across the ground. So if you look at what his ground contact times are, like hop landing, step landing, those things, his don't change a lot because we're trying to get on and off that hop as quick as possible. And then if you look at, say, like Fabian, Florian, he's on the ground very long time. Not as much speed, but he grew up bounding. He tries to muscle everything. So that's just in terms of what their background is. In terms of speed, in terms of leg length, I think it's how you teach the hop landing, step landing, and those things. I don't think, if you look at the women's triple jump, big, long girls, the ground contact times from what the study shows is they're very similar on and off hop, step landings. So, like, how much power you have, what you do in training every day is going to determine what those are, I think.
So, we had the opportunity to work with Walter Davis in the last part of his career. Would you say he was more of a power kind of guy than a speed kind of guy?
Yeah. Depending on when you got Walter in the training year and how much he weighed and what he wanted to do from day to day. Like he liked to create a lot of power. He liked to bound. He liked to feel impact on his hop landing. He liked to feel like basically smashing the ground. So he was more of a power guy.
And so when we've had a chance to work together quite a bit in a lot of different situations, and I think we may have gotten Walter too fast, for example, during that one indoor season. And it didn't allow him to express the force the way that he had been used to and the way that he really grew up with and that type of thing. But tremendously powerful guy. He threw the 16-pound shot over 18 meters, which is massive. I mean, unless you're a thrower. But, always remember to train the athlete toward their strengths while you're working on the weaknesses rather than train the weaknesses and then forget about the strengths.
On the question of fiber types that you mentioned at the start of your lecture, you were talking about going from 1 for endurance to A to B to X, and then you were talking about this other fiber type. Are you saying that athletes have to have this extra fiber type or more qualitative fiber type to be an elite athlete?
In the short sprints, it sure helps. But there's a whole range of distributions relative to percentages, things like that, where you can be successful. There's you're not going to make a racehorse out of a plow mule, but there's certain characteristics that, that the athletes have, and it has a tendency to be more type 2 fibers, and they're able to access these in terms of recruitment much more readily. You may have athlete A and athlete B that have a relatively similar fiber type distribution, but athlete A may be able to recruit their bigger motor units more easily. They may do a better job of using the intramuscular, the stretch shortening cycle, in order to be able to generate greater motor unit recruitment. But all those factors that we kind of listed, okay, that's one of them, but just because it happened to be listed at the top doesn't necessarily mean it's the most important one, but it helps.
I would like to come back to the question I had in the introduction. What was the cause that you changed the side of the triple jump with Taylor, and what was the precondition to be able to do that? Because if I start tomorrow to ride with my left hand, I'm definitely in trouble. So how did you manage that?
I mean, for Christian, he was always a left-right jumper. Out on the blocks, first step out on the ground, left leg. Long jump, left leg takeoff. So everything he did was left leg from early on. And when he came to the University of Florida his freshman year at 17, we just did basic tests, right leg, left leg, alternate bounds, all those things. And from the very beginning, I was like, I think we need to switch to right, left and make your last, jump off your long jump leg. Randy Huntington has been a mentor of mine for a long time, so any type of science testing and gadget, like, he's my guy to go to. So I tested him year after year, and we always went right, left. And so when we switched, it was a coordination thing because we had been working both sides for years anyways, but the ability to run off the board and the speed off the board was what was, the coordination for him was weird. In 2013, at the end of the Diamond League, he actually jumped right, left for the first time at 12 steps and jumped around 17 meters. So people didn't realize that he was jumping that far. If you go back to his freshman year at the university, he was so excited to be at the NCAA championships. He was full speed. He just took off on the right leg and went like 16.96. I think his PB off the left, right was 17.13 that year. So his ability to do that was something that we worked on every day, like for years and years. So it was just getting the coordination to be doing it at full speed. He's got a knee issue on the left side. It's still there. Right side, he's just got some stuff from birth that are never going to go away. So we have to balance what we do from side to side. I think some stuff with Christian is he grew up playing football, basketball, baseball, soccer, and his ability to be an athlete and do different things helped him to be able to jump off of both legs. Like, he's an overall athlete. He didn't specialize in track and field until he got to the university. And so I think that's something different for him is he liked to do all other sports and skateboarding, dunk a basketball from both sides, like all the different things that, the American kids do, I think, is what helped him be able to have the coordination to go from different legs.
Hi, I'm Attila Zsivotsky from Hungary. I'm a multi-event coach, and I'm wondering, do you think, Daphne comes from a heptathlete background, do you think it benefited her as a sprinter, or she would have been better off starting as a sprinter right off?
Well, I mean, she medaled in the hep in the World Champs in 2013, so I think she was decent at that event. But if I look at like my training structure, we try and do as much stuff in all aspects of the sport. So if you're a sprinter, you're doing multiple throws, you're doing hurdle hops, you're doing a lot of stuff that a multi-event decathlete, heptathlete will do. And so I think for her, the training volume overall in terms of all the events helped her develop all the energy systems, all the ability to sprint. So for her body structure, for her abilities, I think that helped. So doing all the events helped her coordination. And I think the ability to go from event to event at a major championship as a heptathlete helped her understand that there's highs and lows of the sport. And so to go from round to round and make a mistake in a sprint event, but still make it to the next round, she's able to have the mentality to understand what I tell her from what she did wrong and then let it go and then get ready for the next event or the next race.
So would you recommend would you recommend to any athletes starting as a multi-event?
I think the more stuff kids can do growing up in different events, different sports, the better it is for them. I think the earlier they specialize, I think you see that there's a quick rise to the top and then maybe a quick fall off. If you look at some of the countries that spend so much time and energy trying to get junior medals and really hype up their junior athletes in single events, or they fall off so quick. So I think the more you can do early on and develop all those skills and kind of figure out what they're going to be good at later on, I think it helps.
The one thing that we do typically for the first 6 weeks at IMG Academy, we're working with 13-year-olds all the way to 19-year-olds in the academy, and it's basically we rotate the athletes around to the different coaches. They learn how to put the shot, to throw the javelin, figure out who can bound, who needs to work on bounding. We're looking for triple jumpers, particularly female triple jumpers. That's one of the events in the United States that's really, really bad right now. But it's a little bit of an audition, and some people find out that, hey, I could be a pretty good high jumper, but I've never high jumped before in my entire life. And so right now we have 5 females and 1 male that are doing the combined events. One of them was 5th at the youth championships in Nairobi. And we're trying to promote this as a high school event also, and trying to promote other coaches to do a similar type philosophy, take a multi-event, combined event approach.
Steve Willis, distance coach from New Zealand. What's one thing that you wish the distance community would learn off the sprint community?
So if you look at just one aspect of Sifan changed coaches and went to a different coach, her mechanics changed quite a bit. She was moving a lot better. There's some of the deficiencies she had at high speeds are gone. So maybe that looking at her alone, like her mechanics have changed, and she's been able to run a little bit faster in the 8, and stuff's getting better. So maybe that's the efficiency of running might be one thing to look at.
Go back to the research of the physiologist Heikki Resku from Finland, who is also a pretty good distance coach. And he was wondering why Finnish distance runners, their performance had dropped and they had fallen out of the international limelight. And so he did a ton of different field tests and what test do you suppose correlated most highly with the ability to go from a national level runner to an international level runner? He found it was the flying 20-meter dash, because you're looking at power output and you're looking at neuromuscular coordination. And so if you can look at the concept of running economy and you can increase your running efficiency, you can reduce your oxygen cost of running. And so at the paces that people are running at the high levels right now, you can't afford to be slow. And so long, slow distance training, as to my point earlier, still a big benefit in terms of aerobic capacity, but to be able to make more refinements in running efficiency, use stored elastic energy better, develop the hamstring contribution and hip extension, these types of things that, this is the bread and butter of sprinters, for example.
Obrigado. Eu sou de Moçambique. Gostaria de saber qual é o peso ideal para atletas que praticam triplo salto, tanto em masculino como em feminino.
He asks, what's the ideal body weight for a triple jumper? Era só isso, né? Female and men and masculine. Pode repetir a pergunta? Se faz favor. Pode repetir.
Sim. Eu estava a perguntar, tanto para a alta competição, qual é o peso ideal para um atleta de triplo salto, tanto masculino como feminino, sabendo que eu, por exemplo, tenho atletas que têm tido muitas dificuldades, quer dizer, muitas, como posso dizer, lesões, não é? E então eu gostaria de saber, talvez tenha a ver com o peso, então eu queria saber qual é o peso ideal.
Basically, is what I asked, the ideal body weight of triple jump in men's and women's. What's the ideal? Because he's a triple jump coach and he's been struggling a lot with some injuries that he think it might be or may not be related to body weight.
So in order to make an attempt to answer, it really depends on the anthropometrics of the athlete. When I look at optimal body weights, you have to look at the different compartments where body weight is. And so you have basically a muscle compartment, a bone compartment, a fat compartment, and a water compartment. The water compartment is sometimes forgotten. And so depending on the technique you use to evaluate the body composition, if we use DEXA scan, which is like a human photocopy machine, you lay on this and it goes bzzz, and it actually takes a low-level X-ray of your body. Female athletes, they need to be less than 15%. Better is 13% in terms of body fat. Now you look at the muscle compartment, and with a DEXA scan, we can look at what percentage of muscle is on the upper body versus what percentage of muscle is on the lower body. And so to be able to evaluate, is there excessive muscle weight that they're carrying in their upper body? And if so, how can we then figure out how to get rid of it? Once you put muscle on, it's tough to get muscle off. And so being very careful in terms of the prescription of the strength training. The skeleton has a certain weight, and the more strength exercises, the more power exercises, and the good nutrition, the bone density is higher. And so this is something that's a positive, not only for skeletal strength, but in the female athlete with high bone mineralization in the early life, you have less chance of osteoporosis in later life. And you don't see the low calcium levels in jumpers like you sometimes do in female distance runners. And then the last component is the water. People that are nervous drinkers, I mean, hydration is very important. But the concept of how much essential body water do you need? If you're taking on an extra liter of water, that's an extra kilo. And so making sure that you're at optimum and not hyperhydration is I think the key. But you have to look at each individual differently. We look at the circumference measurements of the legs and of the arms, and in addition to the DEXA scans, so that, and we do regular skin fold evaluations. And so the skin fold that I use for women, it's 6 sites with the y-intercept. So if all the numbers are 0, you're still 5.64%. And in this, if you want to be competitively ready at an international level, the female athlete has to be less than 10%, which of course Pauline was. Yeah. All the time. And so, you know, developing your own norms with the kind of equipment that you have. Skin fold is, as long as the same person does it every time, it can be very accurate from a longitudinal perspective. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Obrigado.
Hello, this is a question for Rana. I'm not sure he's listening.
Coach, can you please stand up, state your country and your name, please, and what event you coach, please?
Sprints, London, England, David Serrant. Question for Rana about, now that he's based in Holland compared to the US, how much of his time, training time, is spent indoors in Papendal? Compared to in the US in the South, where I'm assuming that it's mainly outdoors.
I've been at a lot of different places in the US. So I was in Kansas, which is pretty cool. So we spent about 4 or 5 months of training time indoors. We do 2 training camps a year, so we're basically 2 months in either South Africa or in the US. I'd say we spend about half our time inside when we're in the country. So just like in Loughborough, we have a long straightaway, a lot of stuff inside. So but I'd say about half.
Going once? Going twice? Okay.
Yeah, it comes from the front. Don't worry.
I coach sprints hurdles, USA, Alan Johnson. When you had the chart up showing the anaerobic and aerobic, the percentages, you did 100 meters, 400 meters. What about the 200 meters?
200 meters, on the first one that I showed from Ostrand, there was no 200 meters listed. On the Gaston one, it started with 200 meters. I just didn't point it out. Okay. But it's more on the 80% anaerobic because of the duration. Okay. But there's still, it's a bigger aerobic contribution in the 200 than we had previously thought, of about 20%. Yes, one more.
Hi, so I'm from the UK, coach sprints, name's David Bruni. So question to Rana. So Adam Gemellus recently changed coach, yourself. So could you perhaps give us a view in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of what he needs to change as a sprinter in order to get to where he wants to get?
Obviously, Adam's run fast. Coming into my program, it's a lot different than, so we can go, for the people that live in, he was with football player, Michael Afalaka, who does high volume, high intense training, to Loughborough, that was not a lot of volume, longer, stretched out, not a lot of racing. And then coming into my program, which is, I'd say, more volume-based, like he's used to. And so for him, his ability to come day-to-day training and understanding that his body's going to have to go through the rigors of high-intense training, back-to-back days, and understand the aches and pains and awareness of sore muscles. That's going to be his biggest obstacle over the next, months. This year he had some lingering stuff in terms of physical problems that he brought with him, and so that's what we're working through. He had a long-term injury this year in terms of, and so his ability to run fast is there. His ability to be able to do it back-to-back rounds and throughout a whole season is what we have to work on. So his understanding what his limitations of his body are is what we're working on. Like technically, he's pretty sound. Obviously, when we're talking about body fat percentages and optimal body weight, that's some stuff that we have to work on with him. And so it's an overall package of what we're trying to look at over the next few years.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Raina, comparing Adam, Sean Pickering from Great Britain, throws coach, so strange question, but comparing Adam and Hakeem Sani Brown and maybe even Chirundi Martina, do you train them the same way? Do you look for differences between them, and how would that manifest itself in the training program for those different athletes doing effectively the same event?
So yeah, Hakeem Sani Brown, 18, Chirundi, I think he's 33, and then Adams, early 20s. They do a lot of similar stuff, but in terms of volume and overall intensity, it's very different. If you look at the mental part of their ability every day, it's completely different. So with Hakeem, he's very similar to Christian in terms of if I tell him one or two technical things to work on, he can correct it immediately. And he's on phase with who he's training with, who he's racing against. His ability just to be like, this is my job, this is the way I'm going to do it, is different than a lot of athletes. Adam, coming from the UK system, he's used to being on the physio bed a lot. He's used to having a very long conversations about a 10-meter start. He's used to having a lot more interaction in terms of what could be bad, what could be good. And so it takes longer to get from point A to point B with Adam than with him. Chirundi coming with his years of experience and the NCAA system, different coaches, and one of his earlier coaches is similar to my program, so he was able to pick up on that pretty early, pretty easy. And he's done it so long that you give him a couple of tips and he's able to do pretty well. So I think the program might be similar, but how you get about the program every day is a huge difference.
Okay, my name is Ibrahim Hussain from Kenya. I'm a long distance. I was a long distance athlete. You cannot remove a Kenyan or an Ethiopian from high altitude. What is the effect, or what are the benefits of sprinters in sea level or high altitude? Is there any effect? And which is the best level to train as a sprinter and field events?
So it depends on the school of sprinting that you come from. So the benefits of altitude on the sprinter doesn't have anything to do with the hemodynamics of erythropoietin, for example. We're not looking at trying to get an increased aerobic effect necessarily. However, when you're at altitude, the air density is less, so the resistance caused by the air is less. There are fewer molecules that you have to push aside as you go through, so consequently, this aspect can positively affect your velocity. The next thing is, depending on the altitude, your body mass doesn't change, but the effect of less gravity reduces the weight. And so you have less negative vertical momentum on landing, so it's easier to reduce your ground time. So two things, less air density, less air resistance, a little bit less gravity, so less forces you have, less negative vertical forces you have to overcome. Now, the regeneration aspect of being up at altitude, you don't regenerate as well. And so whereas the distance running mantra may be live high, train low, the sprinter wants to live low, train high, if they're going to use it, sprinter jumper. And so, for example, in Rieti, Italy, Rieti is at about 400 meters. 30 minutes away is Terminillo, and that's 1,600 meters. And so to be able to go up and do sessions, and I know Professor Roberto Bonomi does this quite frequently with his athletes. We did our training camp in Rieti, and we chose not to. We went up and did one day of just an easy session just to see the place if we wanted to use it in the future and that type of thing. But typically in Bradenton, Florida, we don't have so much altitude. The highest point is Mount Seagrave, and I built that. So.
Sí. Buenos días. Mejor en español. In Spanish better. Juan Carlos Álvarez, de Saltos Horizontales de España, entrenador de saltos horizontales. Es una pregunta para el señor Ryder. Con respecto a la visión de la técnica en triple salto, su atleta Taylor, como varios deportistas americanos, desde las enseñanzas del Dr. Hay, están saltando con un salto de predominio del último salto, jump dominante, de predominio del último salto. Esta forma de salto no acaba de ser seguida en otras partes del mundo. Las evidencias de resultados, de ratios, de proporciones dicen eso. Quería su opinión sobre este tema, sobre el tema de la técnica ideal para saltar triple salto.
If you look at the American training system for kids and what they're doing, there's not a lot of plyometrics being taught. If you look at just physical education and what goes on in the playgrounds or lack of playgrounds and PE, there's not a lot of physical activity going on within the whole United States. If you look at Christian, like I said earlier, he wasn't a plyometrics guy growing up. He played other sports. But if you look at his ratios, they're pretty equal. His biggest hop step was in Beijing on his PB jump, but his hop was around 6 meters. The step was similar, close to 6 meters, and then the last phase was his shortest of any of his championships. So trying to find a balance. In terms of technique, like obviously with Americans, if you don't grow up bounding, you see the Cubans, they come out bouncing right away, young, but they have more of a plyometric background. So for me, it's got to be more of a speed aspect because that's where Christian's at. He can't handle the pounding of a big plyometric program. That's right.
Okay, hey, it's Chris McComb, Miami, Florida, Sprint sports performance coach. My question is, both of you all worked in Florida before. Lauren, you're still there. What is the primary difference between the Optimist, high school, college, and professional with the issues that we're having with, I know we have issues with on the Optimist level, you're saying teaching the sprinting too early. What are the things that can be done to help out going from each level in the 4 levels that we have?
Like saying, not teaching sprinting too early, I think it's being able to do all sports a little bit better. Like looking at the times and looking at, say, AAUs and some of the little kids that are running extremely fast. Like to see them progress at a natural, say 1% a year from 14 to 18. That's what you want to look at for the long term of the sport. Like, it's just trying to find a balance. I don't think it's like this early specialization and just sprinting over and over. And you're looking at some of these kids, like, just out of my own curiosity, I went, because I haven't lived in the U.S. for quite a while, I went and looked at this 13-year-old girl that ran pretty fast, and I started counting the number of races. And she's 13, she's raced 51 times this year. And then you look at some of the high school kids that are coming out, and they're racing 40, 50 times. They start in January, race all the way through. So if you have a high school kid, and you're going to send them to one of the top NCAA universities, they're going to do indoors and outdoors. And they're going to race, on average, 20 times indoors, 20, 25 times outdoors. So by the time they're 19 or 20 years old, over a 4 or 5 year period, they've already raced 300, 400 times, right? And then you look at, say, Bolt or Powell or some of these guys, you look at the length of their career, and they've been running fast for a long time, but then you add the number of races, injuries, not injuries, like the longevity is what you look at. And so if you race over and over and over, what does that leave in the system for later? They might run really, really fast, but to go from high school, NCAA, and then professional, what's left in the tank if you've raced in and out, travel? Then you add the travel from all these kids that are racing all over the U.S., and then, yeah, it just doesn't leave much for later on in their lives, my opinion.
Yeah, I think in terms of long-term athlete development, most of the experts in this area, and I like to use Istvan Balyi, will talk about the different stages of development and that type of thing. But early hyper-specialization is one of the things that that kills athlete development. If you look at all sorts of different sports and track, for example, in NHL, National Hockey League players, for example, in the United States, the ones that make the jump between college and the professional ranks are typically the ones that played more sports growing up, continued to play sports recreationally even after they got to college, and still will go out and kick a ball around or play basketball or something like that, even while they're a high-level professional. The other ones start specializing playing ice hockey when they're 13 years old and to the exclusion of everything else. So the same type of thing applies all through the entire gamut of sports. Now, teaching sprinting, I typically, when I had the company called Velocity Sports Performance, 7 or 8 years old, 7 for females, 8 for males, this is when you get the highest rate of myelinization of the nervous system. So the covering that goes on the nerves, this allows faster transmission of signals. This is about the right age to start teaching young athletes technique and movement. But don't just go this way. It has to be multilateral movements, a lot of different movement skills rather than just sprinting. And even today in the active dynamic warm-up, we do a lot of multilateral type movements, side sliding and pivoting and, trying to train the muscles in multi-planes rather than just a sagittal plane.
I have noticed that coaches have obviously a similar capacity. Lauren could have gone on with his presentation for more hours, you with your questions. This shows the interest and the competence we have in the room. I think we have some interesting key factors, messages learned, which were covered in the science-based contribution, looking now, latest now, different at the 100 and 400 meter as an event, but also looking more into the need of long-term athlete development and avoiding early specialization. I would like to invite you to join me to thank Pauline, Rainer, and Lorenzo for this incredible contribution. Our conference has broken already all existing records in quantity and quality, and I would love we continue that. We have done endurance, strength, speed. We had marathon coaches asking the discus thrower about nutrition. We had the strength coach, the throwing coaches discussing with sprinters about skills. I love that cross-cutting. Tomorrow, we will have a relatively new topic. I'm sure when most of you were seeing first time the program, they were asking, what the hell is that about? The brain as a limiting factor. I would really invite all of you to come to join us tomorrow. It's supposed to be the cream on the cake. We had already a solid, good covering of biomotor abilities, and we think that the brain as a central governor is one of the relative untapped, unused areas for further performance improvement in most, if not all, events. So please, tomorrow we will have an expert giving us some applicable research with Neil Dalloway. And on the panel, we have invited best practice coaching Paul Volt, the Greek winner, Stefanidi, and her coach. So we will try again, same quality like today, best practice applied science. Thanks a lot for your contribution. Thanks again for your question.